Welcome to our latest episode of our small group study. We're going to be talking about the idea of sacrifice today as we talk about Abraham and Isaac in chapter 22 of Genesis. Chad, would you like to start reading for us in verse 9, and if you wouldn't mind going to verse 19?
Sure. Then they came to the place which God had told him, and Abraham built the altar there, and arranged the wood, and bound his son Isaac, and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord Will Provide. As it is said to this day, In the mount of the Lord it will be provided. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven, and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your seed will possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba.
So this is one of those stories in the Old Testament that kind of gives people the shivers. I would say that most non-Christians see it as being kind of creepy, showing God to be bloodthirsty. There's a lot of negative emotions associated with this story. So if you were, either one of you guys were, to talk to somebody who wasn't a Christian, a non-Christian comes to you and says, "Hey man, I'm reading the story. It's kind of weirding me out." How would you, as kind of simply and concisely as possible, how would you explain to them what's happening here?
I think I might go and talk about, one, what it foreshadows, and I might go and talk about, even the very sight of this is we're in the same mountain range, if not the same mountain where Jesus died, a couple thousand years later and stuff like that. For one, I might talk about how the fact that, well, in the end, he didn't kill his son. Yeah. And then two, even the book, I think it's the book of Hebrews, maybe it's elsewhere, but where we get a kind of glimpse into, Abraham believes that God would have had to have raised him from the dead. How do you actually let him go through with it and stuff? So, but maybe somewhere along those lines.
Yeah, okay. I'd talk about we test each other every day, children, and I think Abraham was tested and he succeeded. And God provided the beginning, the middle, the end, and Abraham gets to play a part in that. We all do.
Yeah. Why do you think that God chose such a shocking demonstration? Because you're right, we do test each other, but usually not like, hey, Ken,
I'm gonna kill my brother tonight. You want to come watch?
Go kill one of your kids.
Yeah,
for me.
yeah.
That's.
One of the things that comes to my mind is God's giving us a chance to decide whether we want to pay attention or not, and wrestle with the Word. And he says, here's something that's a little tough to deal with. Would you like to understand it?
I think maybe also, some of the idol worship that went on at the time. This was the very thing that did happen, actually. And they would offer, often their eldest son up on the altar and burn him alive and things of the sort.
Yeah, and I think that without that context, this story can seem incredibly difficult to grapple with. That context makes all the difference in the world. If you understand that at the time that the story takes place, that was a very common feature of idol worship, that God is taking a family and creating a nation for himself out of that, and the gods around him routinely require their worshipers to sacrifice their children. I think we're supposed to get hit with kind of the fierceness of this passage. I don't think, I think sometimes as Christians we make a mistake in trying to downplay some things that God is actually intending to be incredibly difficult. He's you mentioned that there's a value in struggling with these things, and I think that we make a mistake in doing that. I think one of the things that's really important about this, and I think, Chad, that you touched on this, is that he doesn't have his, he doesn't allow Abraham to go through with this.
Yeah.
And I think that in that, God is actually showing an incredible amount of love and displaying an incredible amount of love, because he's basically saying, hey, go sacrifice your son, this person that you've been waiting for your whole life, something that your world's kind of revolving around. It has been revolving around for some time. Someone that the promises that I've been making to you revolve around, and then go and sacrifice him and imagine what that would be like.
Yeah.
And then understand that I'm not going to have you do that. I'm actually going to do that for you. And unlike the gods of the people around you who you're worshiping all the time, I'm not going to require that of you. I'm actually going to step in and take that burden on myself and free you from that burden, which I think is again, if you let the seriousness of the story hit you, then and then that seriousness falls on God rather than on Abraham, that makes it a different story for us, right? It's
Indeed.
If we try to downplay the seriousness of it, then the fact that God puts that burden on himself becomes, oh, well, it wasn't that big of a deal. But if we allow the burden to fall, and then we realize that God takes it, then it's a much more meaningful story. And so I think the fact that a lot of non-Christians struggle with that story isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think that that's a good thing. And if they struggle with it and then understand that, yes, it's as bad as it seems, and maybe even more so, and then God takes that, then it obviously is a bigger picture of grace than it could have been. So if God is actually going to not allow Abraham to go through that, then what's the purpose of going down that path to begin with? Because that's a strange part of the story too. Like if we posit from the beginning that, well, God's going to do this, then it's not like every joke's funny. The question is God doing something like that here? Is this a situation where God's doing a gotcha and it's really not that funny, or why is he going down this road?
I think the text gives us a little bit of hint here as to the purpose, and is there another way to find out that God really is the being that Abraham values above all else? And you kind of think, well, God probably knew this, but and maybe rightfully so he did, but did Abraham also know this? And I think that has value as well.
In rereading the story, I was not surprised, but reminded of how late in the game God says, you can stop now. Mm-hmm. I mean, he literally had his arm up to kill his son. Mm-hmm. And I think, how far do you trust God's going to fulfill his plan through you? I mean, he was about to swing down. It's crazy to me. Yeah. I mean, it sounds crazy, but he stops him at the last moment.
Yeah, and
amazing.
It is amazing, and I think that there's a couple things that if without the setup, there's some things of value that would be lost, and one of them, Chad, you pointed out, which is, how do you make those decisions, and what's the value in making those decisions? Right. So Abraham's being called to make a decision on what's more important, and what the hierarchy is going to look like in practice for his life. And if the hierarchy is actually going to have God on top, or it's going to have something else, because the temptation is always that one of the great blessings of God, one of the gifts of God, is going to take the place of God. The temptation is always there or is only there when the thing is actually good and worthwhile. We're not often tempted to, find some dust bunnies under the couch and start worshiping them, and to start making our lives revolve around them. It's the things that God gives us that are really significant, really meaningful. It's the great gifts that God gives us that run the temptation of upsetting the hierarchy and becoming idols or becoming false gods in our lives. And so God actually has to be careful about the way that he blesses us, which is a weird thing to think about until you start recognizing that you do that with your children all the time.
Of course.
As a parent, the problem in blessing your children is always giving too great of a blessing.
Right.
It's spoiling your children. We don't worry about people who give their kids gruel every day and give them a good beating before they go to bed. We don't worry about that kid becoming spoiled. There's other worries, but being spoiled isn't one of them. But that's the problem is Abraham finally has this thing that has been so valuable, so important to him, and he's being asked to go through with it to the last minute, because at that point that is much more real than. There's a difference between beliefs and actions.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a tendency in our modern Christian world
For sure.
to make Christianity an intellectual exercise,
You bet.
you know, to turn it into a set of propositions. Now, it's not that there aren't propositions to Christianity, but in the long run, if that's all that it is, then it really doesn't matter all that much.
Faith without works is dead.
Right, exactly. Most of us learned a lot of things in school that have absolutely no bearing on our lives. And you probably remember sitting there in school thinking, you know, why should I bother knowing this? Because I'm never going to use it, right? I'm never going to, this is just a set of propositions that are going to have no bearing on my life. Now, some of us made our living
Teaching students things they don't want to know or care
Yes.
about.
I'm now part of the system.
Right, yeah, exactly. But that's a completely different thing than a truth that has a hold of you and that sets the course of your life. Which obviously I think is the point to a lot of this is really what kind of truth is this? When you talk about God being real, when you talk about having faith in God, what are you really talking about? Are you talking about something that alters the course of your life? Or are you talking about something that, you know, is real as you know, Star Trek, or, you know, sorry, Ken, I didn't mean to insult you with that.
What is this, Star Trek?
Yes, right.
You mean Star Wars, right?
Yeah,
What's
Star
Star
Wars.
Trek?
But you know what we're talking about. It's things that just don't have any bearing on your actual existence.
Sure.
I think also here too, you know, Abraham, you know, gets a big truth. Like, you know, sometimes you hear people like, you know, like, well, you know, if I really follow God, then I'm going to be a miserable person. He's going to make me miserable and stuff, you know, and there's things I'm going to have to give up, and it's going to be horrible, and, you know, and you know, Abraham gets this object lesson once and for all that, like, putting God first and acting on it is the best possible outcome every time. And you know, he's got a big object lesson in that, and never has to doubt it for the rest of his life.